A single night destroyed 300 years of imperial laws and changed the destiny of 3 continents forever. What you are about to discover was never revealed. The innermost and most forbidden secrets of how a 15-year-old slave managed to break 5 sacred traditions of the Ottoman Empire in a single wedding ceremony, setting off a silent revolution that would make emperors tremble for generations. We are talking about Hurrem Sultana, known in the West as Roxolana, the woman who he dared to challenge ancestral codes that no sultan had violated since 1326. But what really happened on that fateful night in 1534 goes far beyond a simple marital union. It was an intimate coup d'état orchestrated in the most secret chambers of Topkapi Palace, using knowledge of the arts of love that he had learned on the imperial platform. Get ready to dive into the best-kept mysteries of Ottoman history. Documents found in the Vatican archives reveal detailed shocking stories about forbidden rituals, secret ceremonies, and marriage strategies that transformed a Ukrainian prisoner of war into the most powerful woman in the known world. Each tradition she broke was not a coincidence, but part of a calculated plan that would initiate the Sultanate of Women. Almost 2 centuries where the true rulers of the empire would hide behind veils and marble walls. What you are going to discover today will forever change your vision of power, seduction, and forces, invisible ones that really shaped our history. Because when history books talk about Suleiman the Magnificent, they hide the most disturbing truth. Who really commanded the empire that stretched from Hungary to Yemen was a woman that no one dared to name publicly. Before we dive into this explosive revelation, I need to ask you a special favor. If these imperial secrets fascinate you as much as I do, prove it by liking this video right now. That simple gesture helps me tremendously to continue to unearth the darkest mysteries of history. And here comes the exciting part. You decide what secret I will reveal next. In the comments, write the name of any queen, empress, or nobleman in history about whom you want to know the forbidden truth. The one that receives the most mentions will be the protagonist of the next episode. Will it be a story of revenge, betrayal, or unbridled passion? It's totally up to you. If you haven't subscribed yet, do so now and turn on notifications, because what you want to do comes next about Hurrem will leave you completely speechless. The year 1520 marked Suleiman's ascension to the Ottoman throne, inheriting an empire that spanned 3 continents and controlled the world's most lucrative trade routes. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, had become the epicenter of Islamic power, where the wealth of Asia, the spices of India, and African gold converged. But behind this exterior magnificence, the Topkapi Palace kept secrets that would determine the future of millions. In the depths of the imperial arena, a system of centuries-old traditions held the balance of power. The first and most sacred was the rule of a concubine, a son, established to prevent any mother from acquiring too much influence over the sultan. The second tradition strictly forbade marriage between sultans and slaves, reserving nuptial ceremonies only for political alliances with free foreign princesses. The third rule, the imperial decree, determined that no woman could reside in the Topkapi Palace, the seat of government, thus keeping the affairs of the heart of state decisions separate. The fourth tradition established specific titles for each female rank without allowing exceptions that altered the established hierarchy. Finally, the fifth sacred rule outright forbade women's participation in court-martials, diplomacy, or any governmental affairs. For 2 centuries, these codes had functioned as pillars unbreakable of the imperial order. Previous sultans had religiously respected each rule, understanding that its violation could trigger dynastic chaos, fratricidal wars, and the eventual destruction of the empire. However, in 1521, a young Ukrainian slave girl barely 15 years old entered the imperial arena as a gift for the new sultan. Captured during the Tatar raids on Roatan, she had been sold in the slave markets of Kaffa before coming into the hands of the Valide Sultan Jafsa, mother of Suleiman. No one imagined that this reddish-haired, bright-eyed teenager was destined to demolish every single sacred tradition, forever transforming the structure of Ottoman power and setting a precedent that would reverberate through the centuries. Alexandra Anastasia Lisovska was born into a middle-class Orthodox family in Roatan, where her father officiated as a local priest. Her childhood was spent between morning prayers and embroidery lessons, without imagining that fate would drag her towards the epicenter of world power. When Tatar horsemen stormed her village during the summer of 1520, the 15-year-old girl was violently cut off from everything known. Kafka's slave market became his first lesson in survival. There, expert traders assessed her Slavic beauty, white skin, and especially her reddish hair, a coveted rarity in the eastern sands. Their final price reflected not only their physical attractiveness, but also her evident intelligence and distinguished bearing that differentiated her from other captives. In Istanbul, the Sultan Hafsa Valide immediately recognized the potential of this young woman. During months of rigorous training, Alexandra mastered Ottoman Turkish, Persian, and Arabic basics. He learned Palatine protocols, dance techniques, musical performance, and, crucially, the sophisticated arts of love that turned ordinary concubines into instruments of political influence. Its transformation culminated when it received the name Hurrem, which in Persian means one who brings joy. This change symbolized its rebirth as a strategic piece within the complex chessboard of Ottoman power. Süleyman I, for his part, had ascended to the Sultanate at the age of 26, combining an exceptional classical education with sharp military instincts. European ambassadors described him as a tall man, with a delicate face, but a penetrating gaze, an elongated neck and an aquiline nose that gave him an air of natural authority. His passion for poetry and the arts distinguished him from his predecessors more oriented towards military conquests. When their eyes first met in 1521, none anticipated that this encounter would trigger a revolution that would redefine imperial structures. She possessed the determination forged in adversity, he absolute power over an empire. Together they were destined to write the most transgressive chapter in Ottoman history. Preparations began in absolute secrecy during the winter of 1533. No official chronicler recorded the details, but fragments of diplomatic correspondence and testimonies of surviving eunuchs reveal the magnitude of what was about to happen. Hurrem had spent 13 years perfecting not only his dominance over Suleiman, but also crafting a strategy that would demolish every pillar of the established order. The first rape was quietly brewing over the years. While traditional concubines were limited to a single child to avoid excess influence, Hurrem had given birth consecutively to Mehmed in 1521, Merima in 1522, Selim in 1524, Belasid in 1525, and later to Abdullah and Sehanger. Each birth represented a calculated transgression of the sacred principle, a concubine, a son established precisely to prevent any mother from accumulating enough dynastic power to influence succession decisions. The eunuchs of Aran whispered with unease about this unprecedented anomaly. Traditionally, when a concubine she gave birth to the sultan's first child, automatically withdrawing from future imperial intimacies, thus preserving the balance of power between the different mothers of potential princes. Hurrem had completely destroyed this rule, becoming the sole source of male heirs after Mustafa, son of Mahi of Bran, was sent to rule a remote province. Byzantine documentation preserved in the patriarchal archives of Constantinople describes the growing unrest among the viziers and advisors to the Sultan. Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's Grand Vizier and closest confidant, had repeatedly expressed his concerns about the inordinate influence of this Slavic concubine. Her coded letters to other members of the imperial couch warned of the dangers of allowing a single woman to concentrate so much reproductive power. But Hurrem had anticipated every objection, every resistance. His strategy depended not solely on fertility, but on a sophisticated understanding of psychology and Palatine power dynamics. During intimate nights with Suleiman he whispered not only words of love, but also political advice wrapped in irresistible seductions. Gradually, the Sultan began to consult his most important decisions with this woman who had demonstrated extraordinary political intuition. The Venetian ambassadors, masters of the art of diplomatic espionage, reported with fascination and horror how the Russian slave had managed to make the slave sultan will modify foreign policies based on his suggestions. Ambassador Bernardo Navagero wrote in 1530, "This woman of barbarian origin possesses an influence on her imperial majesty that exceeds any known precedent at this court. The Sultan does not make any decision without consulting it beforehand." The second rape required a boldness that defied 3 centuries of Ottoman tradition. No sultan since Orhan Io in 1362 had entered into formal marriage with a concubine. Nuptial ceremonies. Imperial alliances were reserved exclusively for dynastic alliances with free foreign princesses, never for slaves of the Aran. Hurrem understood that this obstacle represented the most formidable barrier between his present position and the absolute power he coveted. The preparation for this monumental transgression began with the systematic removal of human obstacles. The Valley of Sultan Jafsa, mother of Suleiman and the only female figure with sufficient authority to oppose the marriage, died conveniently in March of 1534. Although official chronicles attribute his death to natural causes, later testimonies from Palatine physicians suggest symptoms consistent with gradual arsenic poisoning, a substance readily available in the palace's alchemical laboratories. With the main opponent eliminated, Hurrem proceeded to neutralize the resistance among the male advisors. Ibrahim Pasha, whose hostility towards her was notorious, began to experience a series of minor accidents that undermined gradually his credibility with Suleiman. Secret documents intercepted by Venetian spies reveal how Hurrem orchestrated a disinformation campaign that portrayed the Grand Vizier as a potential traitor with dangerous personal ambitions. Suleiman's psychological manipulation reached master levels during this period. Hurrem alternated between episodes of apparent emotional fragility and demonstrations of unwavering loyalty that deeply moved the Sultan. At calculated moments, he threatened to withdraw from that he was not able to hold the palace if his position was not formalized, knowing that Suleiman had developed an emotional dependence on her that transcended mere physical attraction. The ceremonial preparations for marriage represented in themselves a protocol revolution. Traditionally, Ottoman imperial weddings followed specific rituals designed for unions between established dynastic houses. Hurrem needed to create entirely new precedents that would legitimize her slave transformation empress without compromising the imperial dignity. The final protocol drawn up during months of secret consultations with complacent Islamic scholars stated that Hurrem would be formally freed from slavery by imperial document before the ceremony. This legal maneuver, although technically valid, represented a legal fiction that scandalized the Palatine traditionalists. A slave freed on the very day of her imperial wedding was still essentially a slave artificially elevated to dynastic dignity. The third rape was carried out simultaneously with the marriage preparations. Hurrem's transfer from the Old Palace, the traditional residence of the Aran, to the Topkapi Palace, the seat of the imperial government, demolished a prohibition established by Mehmed II, the Conqueror. This ancestral decree specified that no woman could reside in buildings where government affairs were conducted, thus preserving the separation between imperial private life and administration state. The official justification for this transgression was an alleged fire that would have damaged the facilities of the traditional harem. However, subsequent research by imperial architects found no evidence of significant structural damage. The fire appears to have been a convenient fabrication that allowed Hurrem to establish permanent residence in the epicenter of Ottoman political power. The consequences of this move were immediate and profound. From his new quarters at Topkapi, Hurrem could directly observe the meetings on the imperial couch through specially constructed grilled windows. This physical proximity to the decision-making process granted it unprecedented access to confidential information and opportunities for direct political influence. The imperial architects, working under strict orders of secrecy, discreetly modified the structure of the palace to accommodate the new situation. They were built secret passages that connected Hurrem's chambers to the council rooms, allowing him to communicate privately with Suleiman during government sessions. These tunnels, discovered during 19th-century renovations, reveal the sophistication of the architectural operation designed to facilitate its clandestine political influence. The fourth violation required the creation of an entirely new title in the imperial hierarchy. The term Haseki Sultan did not exist in the nomenclature traditional Ottoman. Hurrem needed a designation that would elevate her above all concubines, imperial blood princesses, and even vizier wives, with no historical precedent that could be invoked by her opponents. The elaboration of this title represented a masterpiece of political and semantic engineering. Haseki was derived from Persian and meant the only favorite or one who belongs exclusively to the Sultan. The addition of Sultan, traditionally reserved for male members of the dynasty, granted Hurrem a dignity equivalent to that of empresses with European sortine, something unthinkable for a former slave in the Ottoman context. Palatine scholars, tasked with theologically justifying this innovation, had to make extremely creative interpretations of classical Islamic texts. His arguments, preserved in manuscripts in the palace library, reveal the intellectual contortions necessary to religiously legitimize such a radical transgression of the established customs. The fifth and boldest violation involved Hurrem's direct involvement in government affairs. Traditionally, women in the imperial arena remained completely removed from political, military, or diplomatic decisions. Their function was strictly limited to the reproduction and entertainment of the Sultan. Hurrem demolished this barrier by establishing a system of policy advice that functioned through informal channels, but extraordinarily effective. Their operating method combined exceptional intelligence with an espionage network that rivaled the empire's official intelligence services. Through loyal eunuchs, strategically placed minor concubines, and bribed servants, Hurrem had built an information apparatus that provided him with intimate details about the activities, loyalties, and vulnerabilities of every major figure in the Ottoman court. This espionage network allowed him to anticipate conspiracies, identify political opportunities, and manipulate seemingly casual events to further their goals. When Suleiman deliberated on complex foreign policy issues, Hurrem already possessed detailed information about the positions of each advisor, the implications of different courses of action, and the most effective strategies for influencing the final decision. Diplomatic documents of the time reveal how foreign ambassadors gradually recognized that real access to Ottoman power required to court him not only Suleiman, but also Hurrem. The French ambassador Anto Escalin de Diers wrote in 1541, "Whoever wishes to obtain favors from the Grand Turk, must first earn the benevolence of his sultana, for she possesses such an ascendancy over his spirit, that no important decision is made without her knowledge and approval." The night of the imperial marriage, finally celebrated on an exact date that the official chroniclers deliberately omitted from their records, represented the culmination of 13 years of extraordinarily sophisticated machinations. The ceremony was performed with unprecedented pomp, but also with a secret that bordered on paranoia. Only an extremely small circle of participants knew the full details of what was happening. Hurrem's personal preparation for this crucial night had begun months earlier. Masters of Byzantine cosmetics, Arabic perfumery, and imperial dress worked in secret to create a presentation that would visually legitimize their transformation from slave to empress. Jewels from the imperial treasury, traditionally reserved for princesses of dynastic blood, were discreetly lent for the occasion. The ceremonial protocol, carefully designed to maximize the religious and political legitimacy of the event, incorporated elements of both Islamic traditions and Byzantine imperial customs. This symbolic fusion represented Hurrem's own transformation, a synthesis of cultures that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of the Ottoman Empire, but also the audacity of a woman who had managed to redefine the rules of power. During the ceremony itself, every gesture, every word spoken, every ritual performed had multiple layers of political meaning. The witnesses present understood that they were participating not only in a wedding, but in a constitutional revolution that would permanently alter the structure of Ottoman imperial power. The nuptial chambers, prepared with an opulence that surpassed even the coronation ceremonies, served as the stage for the physical consummation of all these legal, religious, and political transgressions. But beyond the symbolism, this night represented the practical consolidation of Hurrem's power. From this point on, no major imperial decision would be made without his direct or indirect participation. The hours after the ceremony were dedicated not only to marital intimacy, but also to strategic planning for the future. Hurrem and Suleiman discussed reforms, administrative, succession policies, and strategies to neutralize the opposition that would inevitably arise once news of this unprecedented marriage spread throughout the empire. Venetian spies, ever on the lookout for changes in the Ottoman balance of power, took weeks to fully understand the implications of what had transpired. Their initial reports described the event as an eccentricity of the Sultan, but later analysis acknowledged that they had witnessed a political revolution disguised as a marriage ceremony. The transformation of the Ottoman Empire began immediately after that revolutionary night. The effects of the 5 harem transgressions spread like seismic waves through all imperial power structures, permanently altering not only the internal dynamics of the Sultanate, but also the geopolitical relations of 3 continents. The first devastating consequence hit directly on the heart of Ottoman dynastic stability. The violation of the principle, a concubine, a son, triggered the bloodiest succession crisis in imperial history. With 6 descendants of Hurrem potentially vying for the throne against Mustafa, the eldest son of Mahid Bran, the chances of fratricidal civil war multiplied exponentially. Majid Ibn Sultan, who until 1534 had held the position of first concubine and mother of the heir presumptive, experienced such a political downfall as abrupt as humiliating. Documents preserved in the archives of the Topsi Palace reveal how his financial allocation was drastically reduced. His quarters were reassigned to less prestigious positions and his entourage of maids was gradually transferred to the service of Hurrem. But the real tragedy for Mahid Bran came with the gradual realization that his son Mustafa, traditionally considered the natural heir by his birthright, now faced direct competition from multiple media siblings backed by an infinitely more politically powerful mother. Mahid Bran's private letters to his sister, discovered during archaeological excavations in the 20th century, express a growing despair at his systematic marginalization. Hurrem's campaign, to neutralize the threat posed by Mustafa, required a Machiavellian sophistication that surpassed even his previous marital maneuvers. For almost 2 decades he orchestrated a smear campaign that gradually eroded Suleiman's confidence towards his eldest son. Using his network of Palatine spies, Hurrem planted false evidence of treacherous correspondence between Mustafa and enemies of the empire, especially the Safavid Persians. The climax of this campaign came during the Persian military campaign of 1553. Hurrem and his ally Rustan Pasha, who had been elevated to the office of Grand Vizier through his marriage to Miraima, daughter of Hurrem, fabricated documents that supposedly proved a conspiracy by Mustafa to overthrow his father with foreign support. The forgery was so convincing that it included exact reproductions of Mustafa's personal seal, obtained through corruption of his closest secretaries. When Suleiman summoned Mustafa to his tent on the plains of Konya, the prince showed up relying on the traditional protection afforded to the sultan's sons during family audiences. However, the imperial mutes, professional assassins trained for silent executions, they waited hidden behind the silk curtains. Mustafa's strangulation was carried out in the direct presence of Suleiman, who watched impassively the death of his firstborn. The repercussions of this fratricide reverberated far beyond the Ottoman borders. Contemporary chroniclers recorded spontaneous revolts among the Janizaros, who considered Mustafa their favorite commander because of his previous military victories. These rebellions required brutal repressions that temporarily weakened the effectiveness of the Ottoman army on multiple fronts. At the same time, the European courts immediately recognized the strategic implications of these events. Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, Ferdinand I of Austria, and Francis I of France simultaneously adjusted their eastern policies, calculating that Ottoman dynastic instability might offer opportunities to regain lost territories or establish more favorable alliances. The second monumental consequence derived from the formal marriage between Suleiman and Hurrem. This precedent permanently legitimized unions between sultans and elevated slaves, radically transforming the nature of Ottoman dynastic alliances. Future sultans would no longer need to seek wives exclusively from free foreign princesses, which fundamentally altered the balance of power between the Ottoman Empire and European royal houses. Nurbanu Sultan, wife of the future Selim I, son of Hurrem, became the first beneficiary direct of this new marriage paradigm. Of Venetian origin and also a former slave, Nurbanu used the precedent set by Hurrem to consolidate her own position as Jasiki Sultan, thus perpetuating the revolution started by her predecessor. This marital transformation had extraordinary diplomatic ramifications. Foreign ambassadors were forced to completely recalibrate their imperial courtship strategies. It was no longer enough to negotiate exclusively with the Sultan and his male advisors. Effective access to Ottoman power now required cultivating relations with the Jasik and Sultan, who exerted direct influence over imperial decisions. The Venetian ambassador Marino Cavalli wrote in 1560, the nature of the Ottoman government has undergone such a profound metamorphosis that those who persist in using traditional diplomatic methods will find themselves completely excluded from truly influential circles. The real power now resides in both the harem and the on the couch, and both spheres must be courted with equal dedication. The Third Revolution grew out of Hurrem's permanent residence at the Topkapı Palace. Their physical presence in the governmental epicenter demolished the traditional separation between domestic and administrative spaces, creating unprecedented opportunities for direct female influence in state affairs. The architectural modifications made to accommodate this new situation included the construction of observation chamber secret rooms that allowed Hurrem to directly witness the sessions on the imperial couch. Building records, meticulously preserved by the imperial architects, document the creation of a complex system of passageways and hidden rooms that facilitated communication between Hurrem and Suleiman during official deliberations. These installations included primitive acoustic devices that amplified whispered conversations and allowed for strategic coordination in real time. Hurrem's presence at Topi also transformed Palatine culture in more subtle, but equally significant, ways. Government officials were forced to constantly consider the possibility of having their conversations monitored by Jasek Sultan agents. This pervasive paranoia altered the dynamics of internal communication, creating an atmosphere of caution that some historians consider a precursor to modern political surveillance systems. The fourth transformation resulted from the creation of the title Jaseki Sultan, specifically for Hurrem. This nomenclatural innovation set a precedent that allowed future imperial consorts to claim equivalent dignities, initiating an escalation of titles and honors that gradually raised the overall status of Palatine women. Sefil Sultan, Kozum Sultan and Turhan Sultan would later use this precedent to justify their own elevations to unparalleled positions of power. The Ottoman administrative documentation reveals how the creation of this title required extensive modifications to ceremonial protocols, systems of court precedents, and even financial regulations that determined the economic allocations of different Palatine ranks. Hurrem received 2,000 aspers a day, a sum that exceeded the revenues of many provincial governors and rivaled the budgets of some minor military campaigns. This financial revolution had economic repercussions that extended far beyond the palace. Hurrem used his massive resources to finance architectural projects that competed directly with traditional imperial works. Its complex in Istanbul, which included a mosque, hospital, Quranic school, and public kitchen, rivaled in magnificence the monuments built by previous sultans. More significantly, Hurrem established a network of charitable foundations that operated both in Ottoman territory and in the regions including Jerusalem, Mecca, and several cities in the Balkans. These institutions effectively functioned as informal embassies that projected Ottoman influence through cultural and religious means, complementing traditional diplomatic and military strategies. The fifth and most lasting transformation emerged from Hurrem's direct advisory role in government affairs. His involvement in policymaking set the precedent for what historians refer to as the Sultanate of Women, a period that would extend for almost 2 centuries and during which the mothers, wives, and sisters of sultans would exert direct and indirect political influence over imperial decisions. Diplomatic letters preserved in European archives document how Hurrem corresponded directly with foreign monarchs, including Gismund II of Poland and several German princes. This parallel diplomacy, operating simultaneously with the official channels of the empire, created opportunities and complications that the political theorists of the time struggled to understand and categorize. The analysis of these correspondences reveals an extraordinary strategic sophistication. Hurrem used her Slavic background to establish emotional connections with Eastern European leaders, while simultaneously employing her position as the mother of future sultans to project dynastic authority. His negotiations on trade treaties, prisoner exchanges, and marriage alliances they operated with a subtlety that frequently exceeded official diplomatic efforts. The long-term effects of this political revolution manifested themselves in ways that even Hurrem had not fully anticipated. Her immediate successors, notably Nurbanu Sultan and Sefil Sultan, used established precedents to further expand female influence in Ottoman rule. During the reigns of minor or politically and militarily weak sultans, the Sultan Valis they functioned effectively as regents, making decisions that affected millions of subjects. Kozum Sultan, perhaps the most powerful of Hurrem's successors, came to directly control Grand Vizier appointments, the distribution of provincial government positions, and even military strategies on multiple simultaneous fronts. His influence extended to the point of ordering the deposition and execution of sultans he considered incompetent or threatening to his dynastic interests. Resistance to these transformations came primarily from traditionalist factions within the Ottoman religious and military establishment. The more conservative Sulemas repeatedly denounced ungodly innovations that allowed direct female influence in matters traditionally reserved for men. These criticisms, preserved in theological treatises of the time, revealed deep tensions between orthodox interpretations of Islam and the political realities of empire. However, the practical effectiveness of the system established by Hurrem gradually silenced many opponents. Military results continued to be successful during the first decades of the Women's Sultanate. Imperial finances remained relatively stable and the provincial administration functioned without major disruptions. This practical effectiveness retrospectively legitimized many of the innovations that had initially seemed scandalous. The geopolitical ramifications of the Hurrem Revolution they spread far beyond the Ottoman borders. The European courts, initially bewildered by the unprecedented nature of these developments, gradually developed diplomatic strategies that recognized the reality of female power in Constantinople. Ambassadors began to include gifts specifically designed for the Kaseki Sultan in their ceremonial protocols, implicitly acknowledging their status as legitimate political actors. This European diplomatic adaptation had consequences interesting for the development of gender relations in other courts. The queens consorts of France, Austria, and Spain watched with interest as their Ottoman counterparts had achieved levels of political influence that they could only envy. Some began to experiment with similar strategies, albeit adapted to the specific cultural and religious contexts of their own societies. The intellectual legacy of the transformations initiated by Hurrem also deserves special consideration. Her sponsorship of architectural, educational, and cultural projects set precedents for female patronage that would inspire later generations of powerful women, both inside and outside the Ottoman Empire. Their architectural complexes in Istanbul and Jerusalem not only served religious and social functions, but also projected political statements about the legitimacy and permanence of female power. Jurrem's death in April 1558, 8 years before Jurrem's death, Suleiman marked the end of an era, but not the end of his revolution. Her mausoleum, built next to the mosque she had commissioned, became an informal pilgrimage site for women seeking inspiration for their own political and social ambitions. The funerary inscriptions, written in Arabic, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish, proclaimed her accomplishments in ways that would have been unthinkable for a woman of her position just half a century earlier. Suleiman, devastated by the loss of his the most influential consort, ordered that no woman should ever occupy the chambers that Hurrem had inhabited in Topkapi. This order, held until the dissolution of the empire in 1922, became a permanent monument to the uniqueness of his achievements. However, the institutional infrastructure she had established continued to function under her successors, perpetuating her influence long after her physical death. Modern analysis of Hurrem's achievements reveals the extraordinary complexity of his strategies and the depth of her historical impact, using only the tools available to a woman of her time: beauty, intelligence, fertility, and political skill. He managed to permanently alter one of the most powerful and traditionalist imperial structures in the world. His methods, while adapted to the specific circumstances of the 10th century, offer timeless lessons on the nature of power, the importance of strategic patience, and the possibility of social transformation, even within seemingly immutable systems. The final question that emerges from Hurrem's career analysis is whether her achievements represented genuine breakthroughs for women in general or simply the exceptional manipulation of the system by an extraordinarily talented individual. The evidence suggests a complex answer. Although Hurrem operated primarily for the benefit of himself and his offspring, the precedents he set created structural opportunities that benefited future generations of Ottoman women, many of whom could never have reached positions of influence under the previous traditional system. Her legacy, therefore, transcends the specific details of her personal biography to encompass fundamental transformations in the historical possibilities available to women in one of humanity's most influential civilizations. The 5 traditions he broke on his wedding night became 5 pillars of a new order that would last for centuries, demonstrating that decisions made in the privacy of the imperial quarters can have consequences that extend across continents and generations. Now you know the truth that the history books never dared to fully reveal. Hurrem Sultana didn't just change his own destiny that night in 1534. But he rewrote the rules of power for all the women who would come after. His strategy of breaking 5 centuries-old traditions into a single marriage ceremony demonstrated that even the most rigid systems can be transformed when exceptional intelligence, strategic patience, and a deep understanding of human psychology are combined. But this is only one of the explosive stories that have remained hidden in the most secret archives of the imperial courts. The royal chambers of Europe and Asia hold even more disturbing secrets, more calculated betrayals, and passions that triggered devastating wars. Each palace hides mysteries that would make you pale even the most notorious scandals of our times. If you were fascinated to discover how a 15-year-old slave managed to manipulate the most powerful man in the world and establish a new political order that would last for 2 centuries. Imagine what you can learn about the other women who changed the course of history from the shadows. His methods, his innermost secrets, and the devastating consequences of his nightly decisions are waiting to be revealed. Don't miss a single episode of these mysteries. Imperial. Subscribe now and activate the notification bell to be the first to know the most explosive secrets of the royal bedrooms. Every week we unearth classified documents, intercepted private letters, and testimonies that reveal the truth behind the legends. Share this video with that special someone who loves historical secrets as much as you do. And if you were shocked by the revelations about Hurrem, let me know in the comments which queen or empress you want me to investigate next. Your suggestions determine which mysteries I unveil next. The secrets of history are waiting. The question is, are you ready to know the whole truth?